I stared at the screen, my heart pounding in my chest. $12.47. That was all I had left. The numbers blurred as tears welled up in my eyes, mocking me with their cruel simplicity. Rent was due tomorrow, and payday was still 5 days away. My hands trembled as I logged out of the banking app, as if closing it would somehow make the reality disappear. "Mommy, are you okay?" Lily's voice broke through my haze. I turned to see her standing in the doorway, clutching her stuffed bear. The one she'd had since she was a baby. Her big brown eyes were filled with concern. "I'm fine, sweetheart," I lied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about work." She nodded slowly, but I could tell she didn't believe me. She always knew when something was wrong. Later that evening, I stood in line at the grocery store, clutching a few items: cereal, eggs, milk, basic things that Lily needed. The cashier scanned each item, and I swiped my card with a silent prayer. Declined. "Let me try again," I stammered, my voice cracking. Declined. The cashier gave me a sympathetic look as she began removing items from the bag. First the cereal, then the eggs, then the milk. Finally, only a pack of ramen remained. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I nodded, swallowing my shame as I grabbed the ramen and walked out of the store with Lily trailing behind me. She tugged on my sleeve as we reached the parking lot. "Mommy, can we get cake for my birthday next week?" Her voice was full of hope. I froze, my chest tightening. "We'll see," I said quickly. "Maybe we'll do something special." Her face lit up with excitement, and guilt clawed at me like an unforgiving tide. That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching her bear, I sat alone at the kitchen table with a stack of unopened bills and a cheap glass of wine. The letter from the bank stared back at me like an accusation. "Your account is overdrawn by $300. The words felt like they were screaming at me. I buried my face in my hands and sobbed silently into the darkness. How had it come to this? 2 jobs, endless hours on my feet, and still nothing to show for it. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. How would I pay rent? How would I keep food on the table? How would I give Lily even a shred of happiness? As tears streamed down my face, I reached for Lily's bear and held it tightly against my chest. It smelled faintly of her shampoo, comforting yet heartbreaking all at once. "I'll figure this out," I whispered to myself in the quiet kitchen. "I have to." But deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed it anymore. I gripped the edge of my desk, staring at the clock on the wall. 9:15 a.m. My heart raced as I rehearsed what I was about to say. I'd waited weeks for Mr. Cole to honor his promise of a promotion, but nothing had changed. The extra shifts, the late nights, covering for sick employees. It felt like I was running on fumes for nothing. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the door to his office. He was hunched over his laptop, barely glancing up as I stepped inside. "Mr. Cole," I began, my voice steady but tight. "Can we talk about the promotion you promised me last month?" He sighed, leaning back in his chair and rubbing his temples like I was an inconvenience. "Clara, now's not a good time." I clenched my fists behind my back. "It's been weeks, sir. You said it was finalized." He finally looked at me, but his gaze didn't meet mine. It hovered somewhere near my shoulder. "Budget cuts," he muttered, waving dismissively. "The company's in a tough spot right now." "Budget cuts?" My voice rose despite myself. "I've been working double shifts for months. You said—" "Clara," he interrupted sharply, his tone cold now. "This isn't personal. We all have to make sacrifices." I stared at him in disbelief as he turned back to his laptop, like the conversation was over. My chest burned with anger, but I swallowed it down and left the room before I said something that would cost me my job. Later that afternoon, as I stocked shelves in the back room, I heard laughter echoing from the break room. Curiosity got the better of me, and I edged closer until their voices became clear. "Yeah, picked it up yesterday," Mr. Cole was saying proudly. "Fully loaded. Leather seats, panoramic sunroof. Cost me a fortune." "You deserve it," another voice chimed in. I froze in place as rage bubbled up inside me like molten lava. Budget cuts? Sacrifices? Yet here, he was bragging about his new sports car, while I struggled to keep food on the table for Lily. That evening, after closing the store, I stayed behind to finish inventory and stumbled across something strange in the financial records. Numbers didn't match up. Thousands of dollars were missing from accounts that should have been untouched. My stomach dropped as realization dawned. Mr. Cole wasn't just stingy. He was stealing. The next morning, armed with spreadsheets and evidence, I marched into his office again and slammed the papers onto his desk. "What's this?" he asked coolly. "You know exactly what it is," I shot back, my voice shaking with fury. "You've been embezzling money from the store." He leaned back in his chair with a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Careful now," he said softly. "Accusations like that could cost you more than your job." I blinked at him, frozen by the weight of his words. "Keep quiet," he continued, his tone dripping with menace. "And we won't have any problems." My hands trembled as I gathered the papers and left his office without another word. Expose him and risk losing everything, or stay silent and drown in guilt? The choice felt impossible. I held the necklace in my palm, its delicate gold chain glinting faintly under the fluorescent lights of the pawnshop. My grandmother had worn it every day, a simple charm engraved with her initials. It was the only thing she'd left me when she passed, her legacy, her love. And now, it was my last lifeline. The clerk barely glanced at it as he weighed it on his scale. "150, he said flatly, not bothering to look up. I swallowed hard. "That's all?" He shrugged like he'd heard the question 1,000 times before. "Gold prices are down." My fingers tightened around the necklace for one last moment before I placed it on the counter. "Take it," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The clerk slid the cash across the counter without another word. I stuffed it into my purse and walked out into the cold evening air, feeling like I'd just sold a piece of my soul. Later, I stopped by the bakery and bought a single cupcake, pink frosting with sprinkles. Lily's favorite. When I handed it to her after dinner, her face lit up like I'd given her the moon. "Is this for my birthday?" she asked, bouncing on her toes. I forced a smile. "Mommy's saving the big cake for your party." The lie tasted bitter on my tongue, but her joy made it worth it, at least in that moment. That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching her bear, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and a cheap bottle of wine. The spreadsheets from work stared back at me like an unsolvable puzzle. The numbers didn't add up. Thousands of dollars missing from accounts that should have been untouched. Ethan's smirk flashed in my mind, and anger surged through me again. I picked up my phone and dialed the police. The line rang twice before someone answered. "City Police Department," a woman said briskly. I need to report fraud," I stammered, clutching the phone tightly. "Can you provide details?" she asked calmly. I froze, doubt creeping in like an unwelcome guest. What if no one believed me? What if Ethan turned this around and made me look like the liar? My pulse raced as fear wrapped around me like chains. "I'm sorry," I whispered before hanging up abruptly. The room felt suffocating as I poured another glass of wine and grabbed a stack of napkins from the counter. Scribbling numbers frantically, I tried to make sense of it all. Tried to find something concrete that would prove Ethan's guilt beyond doubt. Hours passed as calculations blurred together and exhaustion set in. The wine dulled my panic, but couldn't erase it entirely. By dawn, I was surrounded by crumpled napkins, covered in messy handwriting and half-finished equations. My grandmother's necklace was gone. Ethan was still free, and I had nothing to show for it except desperation. I rested my head on the table and closed my eyes, whispering to myself, "This can't be how it ends." The library was quiet, a welcome reprieve from the chaos of my life. I sat at the corner table, surrounded by spreadsheets and scribbled napkins, trying to make sense of Ethan's mess. My laptop screen displayed numbers that didn't add up, columns that screamed fraud. But I was stuck, too exhausted and too scared to take the next step. "Looks like you're wrestling with some serious math," a voice said from behind me. I turned to see an older man with kind eyes and a warm smile. He held a stack of books under one arm and gestured toward my table with the other. "I'm Harold," he said, pulling out the chair across from me without waiting for permission. "But most people call me Hal." I hesitated, but nodded. "Clara." Hal glanced at my spreadsheets, his brow furrowing. "Mind if I take a look? Numbers are kind of my thing. I used to be an accountant before retirement." Something about his demeanor made me trust him. I slid the laptop toward him, watching as his fingers moved deftly over the keyboard. Within minutes, he was shaking his head. "This isn't just sloppy bookkeeping," he muttered. "It's deliberate." I leaned forward, my heart pounding. "You mean fraud?" "Exactly," he said, pointing to a column of transactions. "Look here, $50,000 siphoned off into an account that doesn't belong to the business." My stomach churned as the reality sank in. Ethan wasn't just stealing. He was stealing big. Hal looked at me with a seriousness that made my throat tighten. "You need to report this." I shook my head instinctively. "I can't. If I do, I'll lose my job, or worse." "You'll regret silence more than action," he said firmly, his voice steady but kind. "People like Ethan count on fear to keep them safe. Don't let him win." His words echoed in my mind long after he left the library. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Lily coloring beside me and dialed the fraud hotline. My hands trembled as I filed the report, detailing everything Hal and I had uncovered. The next morning, Ethan called me into his office. His face was stone cold as he tossed a termination letter onto his desk. "You'll never work in this town again," he sneered. I stared at him, swallowing the lump in my throat as tears threatened to spill over. "Get out," he added, with venom in his voice. I walked out of his office feeling numb, clutching the letter in my hand like it was proof of my failure. When I got home, Lily ran up to me with her bear in hand. "Mommy, why are your eyes red? Were you crying?" I forced a smile and wiped at my cheeks quickly. "Allergies," I lied. She nodded innocently and went back to her coloring book while I sank into the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Ethan had taken my job and crushed what little security I had left. But he hadn't taken everything. Not yet. The line stretched around the block, a silent parade of desperation. I clutched Lily's hand tightly as she hummed a tune under her breath, her stuffed bear tucked under her arm. The humiliation burned my cheeks like fire. I kept my head down, avoiding eye contact with the others waiting for their turn to collect canned goods and bread. "Mommy, why are we here?" Lily asked, her voice light and curious. I forced a smile. "We're picking up some extra food, sweetheart. It's like a special store." She nodded, satisfied with my answer, and went back to humming. I envied her innocence, her ability to see the world without the weight of shame pressing down on her shoulders. As we shuffled forward, I felt eyes on me. A woman a few spots ahead turned slightly, her gaze lingering. My stomach dropped when I recognized her, Karen from the PTA. We'd worked together on bake sales and school fundraisers back when I could afford to contribute. Now she was here too, but instead of acknowledging me, she quickly looked away. The sting of her avoidance cut deeper than I expected. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the pavement beneath my feet. But Lily tugged on my hand, pulling me forward as the line moved. That night, after Lily fell asleep clutching her bear, my phone buzzed. Hal's name flashed on the screen. "Clara," he said as soon as I answered, his voice steady but urgent. "The police found Ethan's offshore accounts. He's been funneling money out for years." My breath caught in my throat. "What does that mean?" "It means you'll testify next week," Hal replied firmly. "They need your statement to close the case." Panic surged through me like ice water. Testify? Hal, what if Ethan retaliates? What if he comes after me? Or Lily? "You're stronger than you think," he said gently but resolutely. "You've already taken the hardest steps. Don't stop now." I hung up and stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror for what felt like hours. My face looked pale and worn, but I forced myself to practice my testimony aloud. "He stole from us," I whispered to the mirror, imagining Ethan's smirk crumbling under the weight of my words. "He thought no one would notice, but we did." The words felt hollow at first, but with each repetition, they gained strength. By the time I put down my toothbrush and walked away from the mirror, I almost believed them. As I settled into bed, my phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number flashing across the screen. I hesitated before pressing play on the voicemail. "Drop the charges." A low voice growled through static. "Or else." My blood ran cold as I stared at the phone in my hand. The threat hung in the air like smoke, suffocating and heavy. The courtroom was colder than I expected, the air heavy with tension. I sat at the plaintiff's table, my hands gripping the edge of my chair so tightly my knuckles turned white. Across the room, Ethan sat smugly with his lawyer, his confidence radiating like poison. "Mommy!" Lily's voice broke through the noise in my head. I turned to see her waving from the gallery, her bear clutched tightly in her arms. Her smile was pure sunshine, and for a moment, it melted the ice gripping my chest. The bailiff called the court to order, and Ethan's lawyer wasted no time launching his attack. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, pacing in front of the jury, "what we have here is a desperate single mother blaming her boss for her financial troubles. A woman who has no credibility, no evidence, just anger." His words sliced through me like knives. My hands trembled as I stared at the spreadsheets in front of me. For a moment, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Then I glanced at Lily again. She waved at me with both hands now, her little face full of encouragement. Something inside me steadied. I stood up slowly, clutching the papers tightly as I approached the stand. My voice shook at first as I explained the discrepancies, the missing funds, the offshore accounts. But with every word, it grew steadier. "These spreadsheets don't lie," I said firmly, holding them up for the court to see. "Ethan Cole stole from his employees and his business to fund his own lavish lifestyle." Ethan's lawyer smirked, but said nothing. Ethan himself shifted uncomfortably in his seat for the first time. Hal took the stand next, his presence calm and authoritative. "Clara Dawson is one of the bravest people I've ever met," he said, looking directly at me as he spoke. "She risked everything to expose corruption, when most people would have stayed silent." The judge leaned forward, examining the evidence carefully before speaking. "Mr. Cole," he said sternly, "your assets are hereby frozen pending further investigation." Ethan's face turned pale, as whispers rippled through the courtroom like a wave. Afterward, reporters swarmed me outside the courthouse, their cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward my face. Questions blurred together in a cacophony of noise, until I spotted Lily waiting by Hal's side. I pushed through the crowd and scooped her into my arms, holding her tightly as tears stung my eyes. "Is the bad man gone?" she asked softly. "Yes, baby," I whispered into her hair. "He's gone." For the first time in months, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Peace. The smell of fresh bread and vanilla frosting filled the air as I wiped down the counter of my small bakery. The sunlight streaming through the window warmed the space, and for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. The whistleblower reward money had been a lifeline, a chance to start over, to build something that was truly mine. "Mommy, look!" Lily chirped from behind me, her face smeared with frosting. She held up a cupcake she'd decorated herself, the sprinkles uneven, but charmingly chaotic. I laughed and kissed her forehead. "You're going to be my best baker someday." She giggled and went back to her task, carefully licking the frosting off her fingers as she worked. The bell above the door jingled, and I looked up to see Karen, my old PTA friend, stepping inside hesitantly. Her eyes darted around the bakery before landing on me. "Clara," she began softly, I'm sorry for avoiding you at the food bank. I didn't know how to face you." I set down the rag in my hand and smiled gently. "It's okay, Karen. We all go through hard times." Her shoulders relaxed, and she ordered a loaf of sourdough and a dozen cupcakes for her kids. As I packed them up for her, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction, not just from earning her business, but from reconnecting with someone who had once been part of my life. At closing time, Hal came by to check on things. He'd become my unofficial business advisor, offering tips on accounting and inventory management that had been invaluable. "You're doing great," he said as he glanced at the register. "How much did you make today?" $327, I replied proudly. "It's not millions, but it's mine." Hal grinned and patted my shoulder. "That's how it starts." After he left, I sat down with my phone and typed out a message to Ethan's ex-wife. "Thank you for testifying." Her reply came quickly. "He stole from me too." I stared at the screen for a moment, before setting the phone aside. Ethan had taken so much from so many people, but he couldn't take this. Not anymore. That night, as I tucked Lily into bed, she hugged her bear tightly and looked up at me with sleepy eyes. "Mommy," she murmured, "are we going to be okay now?" I brushed her hair back and kissed her cheek. "We're going to be more than okay," I promised softly. "Mommy's never letting go again." As I turned off the light and closed her door behind me, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. A peace born not from wealth, but from resilience. This was my first step towards something better. A life built not on fear or desperation, but on strength and hope.